Beginnings, Chapter 1, 1935 to 1940, in the beautiful book, Big Love. About 7 miles west of the Tibetan capital of Lhasa, along the Kichu River, lay the mouth of the Tolung Valley, which runs northwest along the course of the Tolung River. Like many regions of Tibet, this fertile valley was filled with historic landmarks and Buddhist holy sites. In the upper valley, next to the village of Dechen Song, the local administrative center, situated about 30 miles from Lhasa, lay the tiny hamlet of Shinkarla, consisting of flat-roofed, walled compounds built of mud and gray stone. The house, known as Shinka Changmar, took its name from the local changma, or willow tree. In 1935, it was a large and thriving home, filled with the laughter and activity of a bustling extended Tibetan family. Many trees dotted the landscape, including the willow trees along the banks of the valley streams and rivers from which the place had derived its name. Neat black cakes of dried dung, used as fuel for heating and cooking, topped the outside walls. The flat valley floor was sown with barley and wheat and walled in by mountains streaked and folded in rainbows of ore sweeping every horizon. Great boulders cluttered the furthest edges of the valley and lay scattered among the crops like giant mushrooms. A little creek wound throughout, its waters twinkling in the sunlight. Small, thick-set horses with beribboned bridles and bright saddlecloths grazed while field workers picnicked among the wildflowers. The family occupying Shinka Changmar bore the same name as the house. Simple enclosures used to house calves at night lined one side of the inner yard. Marigolds, forget-me-nots, and wallflowers were planted next to a smooth mud wall, and colored cotton ruffles hung above each doorway. A bridle hung on the wall at the smoke-blackened entrance to the small, dark kitchen and pantry. In the main room, neatly folded quilts and blankets were stacked against the walls, and there were carpeted wooden beds to sit on, and the mud floor was bare. As in almost every Tibetan household, the shrine room was the spiritual and cultural center of the home. It contained many holy objects as well as large collections of scriptures, the teachings of Buddha, in the form of cloth-wrapped Tibetan texts, or pecha. There was a strong family resemblance among family members, a good, high, round forehead, and a soft mouth. Almost all the village residents were born and died at home, spending their entire lives working and praying. They wore traditional clothing, a thick chuba, the wraparound dress of Tibet, boots and colored striped aprons for the married women. Now, washing was not a regular practice at this altitude. They grew and prepared their own food, crumbly, pale-colored salty cheese piled in wooden bowls, dark, air-dried yak meat, cauliflower, spinach, and a little chili eaten with freshly made noodles or roasted barley flour, which in Tibetan is called sampa, a beloved staple of Tibet. They drank salted butter tea or a homemade beer called chang. Children were plentiful, and the toddlers wore woolen trousers strategically open underneath from front to back. The birth of Dandrup Dorje. In May 1935, a young son was born in Shinka Changmar to Jako and her husband, Pema Wangyal. It was an easy birth, and the child was born with a cowl, which is considered in Tibet, as it is elsewhere, to be a very auspicious sign. The boy was named Dandrup Dorje. This was the child who would grow up to become Lama Thubten Nyeshe, founder of the Foundation for the Preservation of the Mahayana Tradition, one of the world's largest international Buddhist organizations, and who would inspire countless people around the world to investigate what it really means to be a human being. Only 2 months later, on July 6th, the boy who was to become the 14th Dalai Lama was born in the village of Tokster in northeast Tibet. Jako already had 3 children from an earlier marriage, 2 girls, Dorje and Sering Drolma, and a boy, Punsog Tinley, born in September 1929. The father of these three, Jampa, also had an older daughter, Chuzum, from a previous liaison. Some time ago, when their children were very small, Jampa had left Jacko for another woman, taking with him horses, saddles, and luggage. He even returned several times to take away more goods. From that time forward, Jacko was burdened with the responsibility of not only caring for all their children, but managing the family's not inconsiderable estates. They owned around 1,000 acres of good tolling farmland. At times she had under her employ more than 100 workers who plowed the fields and sowed and harvested the family crops of barley, beans, mustard, radishes, and other vegetables. Besides tending flocks of goats, sheep, cows, yaks, and horses, the family also made their own sampa and pressed mustard seed for oil. Everything was done by hand. There was no machinery. The family work, dealing with the merchants and planning for the future while raising 3 children alone, was very hard on Jacko. It was not the custom to employ nannies, but one of her servants, a shepherd called Pema Wangil, fell in love with her and in time became the new head of the family. Now Pema Wangil also had an older child by an earlier liaison, a boy, Dorji Sering, born in 1927. Dorji Sering lived with his mother in a similar hamlet just down the road and over the bridge from Shinkarla. Jacko and Pema Wangil eventually had 3 more children together. The arrival of their first child, Dondrup Dorje, was followed by the birth of another son, Rinchen Tashi, and then 2 girls, Tashi Droma and Nenka Droma. Reincarnation. Across the fields from Shinkarla, about an hour's walk directly south of Dachin and situated in a small tributary valley off the east bank of the Tolan River, was a small nunnery, Rekor Gompa. Of the 4 traditions of Tibetan Buddhism, Nyingma, Kagyu, Sakya, and Gelug, Rekor had followed the Gelug tradition for the previous 150 years or so. When Dondrup Dorji was born, Rekor housed about 60 nuns. Their abbess, a fine big woman known as Achijampa, had died less than a year before in late 1934. During her long life, she had inspired many people and was remembered for her favorite prayer, the popular, "May I be able to bring the Dharma to those who have never met it and who live in suffering, their wisdom eye blinded by the darkness of ignorance." When Dondrup Dorji's older half-brother, Dorji Sering, was 7, he was sent to study with his uncle, a monk called Nawang Norbu, who lived just near Rekor. Dorji Sering had often visited Achijampa, who gave him sweet treats. At that time, Nawang Norbu was studying for his examinations at Sera Monastery, one of the 3 great monastic universities located in the vicinity of Lhasa, the other 2 being Drepung Monastery, the largest monastery in the world, and Ganden Monastery, founded by the great Je Tsongkhapa himself. Sometime after the death of Achijampa, an important Kagyu Lama, the 10th Nenang Pawa Rinpoche, came to visit the area. The Rekor nuns were very eager to know if he could tell them where the reincarnation of their beloved abbess had been born. After some deliberation, he directed them to the Shinga Chengmar house, saying, "A small boy there is the reincarnation of your dear abbess." That discovery filled the nuns with great joy. When they came to meet him, Dondrup Dorji hadn't yet started to walk. They visited him often, bearing gifts and lavishing on him the combined love of 16 maiden aunts. They talked to me about my history, Lama Yeshe later recalled. They showed me things and said, "This is yours from a previous life." Actually, I wasn't very interested. I was so young and just wanted to play. The nuns loved me so much. "You are a good reincarnation," they told me. Some time before, Phuntsog Tenle, Dondrup Dorji's older half-brother, had been sent to become a monk at nearby Chubsang Monastery, but had repeatedly run away. It seemed he wanted to go to Sera Monastery instead. Later, when he reached his 8th year, his parents allowed him to leave and join Sarah, where his stepfather's eldest son, Dorji Sering, had already been studying for 2 years. Clearly, Dondrup Dorji was also destined for a monastic life, but not merely because the Rekor nuns desired it. This little boy was always delighted when monks came to house. Every time he begged to be allowed to leave with them. As Lama Yeshe later described, when monks from the nearby Gompa came to our shrine room to say prayers, I liked to sit beside and imitate them. I did that kind of thing a lot. I loved monks. Whenever I saw them, I got an intuitive good feeling. They loved me too. I even built a small cave and stayed inside, pretending to meditate. My family's shrine room was bigger than most American houses. It was very old, and the things in it had been collected over many generations. We had many statues, including a huge Maitreya Buddha, the 5 Buddha types, Tara, Vajrasattva, and Avalokiteshvara. We made water offerings and lit at least one butter lamp every day. Once a month, on special occasions, 5 monks came to make puja all day long and would occasionally read the Prajnaparamita Sutra. The Rekor nuns began taking Dondrup Dorji to their Gompa, where he sat in the seat of honor at ceremonies and slept in a little room besides the shrine room. He always was very happy there, despite the long rituals and being away from home for days at a time. Although he had been recognized as the reincarnation or tulku of Achijampa, the boy was never given the title of Rinpoche or Precious One, generally conferred on only formally recognized reincarnates. Although there are a few female tulkus, including the most well-known, the Gelug Lama Dorji Phagmo, it was not common practice in Tibet to formally recognize reincarnations of females. Actually, not all male reincarnate lamas were formally recognized either. Home life. Dondrup Dorji was to have only a few years of family life. In later years, Lama Yeshe told his foreign students more about his childhood. We had yaks that were kept on the mountains, not at home. We had lots of sheep and goats, horses and so, hard-working animals that are a cross between cows and yaks and are used for plowing the fields. We got butter and cheese from the yaks. The farm workers, our family, and the other farming families in the area consumed all the food we produced. My family had been very wealthy before my mother's first husband took so much away. In the evenings, my mother used to sit with all the children around her and tell us stories about the hard times she had when her first husband left. It was incredibly painful for her. She couldn't take care of everything. There were more than 100 people to cook for. How could she cope? People took advantage of her because she was alone and didn't know about the laws, the outside world, or how to pay taxes. She was really extremely lucky when my father became her second husband. It was a local custom among the villagers to joke and compete about which family in Shinkarla owned the most ferocious dog. Dondrup Dorji adored his family dogs, especially the huge Tibetan Mastiff kept chained at the gate. He spoiled them and often got into trouble for stealing eggs for them. In this, as in other Tibetan families, the girls were set to work in the house as soon as they were old enough, and they did not have nearly as much free time to play as the boys did. In his spare time, little Dondrup juggled stones and played imaginary games in the orchard with his prized collection of yak horns. I energized them. I'd say, "You, come here, yak." I also loved looking after the animals. I helped cut the wheat and I rode horses. I was not a serious boy and was always making jokes. My family was not well educated in philosophical matters, so I didn't learn those kinds of things from them. But they were naturally religious. My father was devoted to his prayers and knew many which he recited morning and evening. He was highly respected in the district for saying exactly what he thought. Local people said, "Pema Wangil is just like a sheep because he is completely trusting." He was so honest that everybody loved him. Families came to see him when they had problems, and he made divinations, or mo, for them with his rosary. For example, a wife might come by and say, "My husband is late coming home." My father would then be very serious. He'd meditate, rub and blow on his rosary, check it and say, "Nothing wrong, coming soon." He never used many words, but if he'd been wrong, people would not have come to him so often. My mother was tall, my father short. Their biggest disagreement was about how to help others. My father didn't like beggars. He thought they didn't want to work and just wandered around taking whatever they could. He'd give them something, but he preferred to make big donations to monasteries and hard-working monks. Every day, maybe 10 or 20 beggars came to the house. It was customary to always give something, never to say no, but my mother liked to give them more than my father did. She was practical and thought, well, they're poor and they need more, so why not give more? So whenever my father was away from home, all the beggars came around, but when he came back, they'd run away. Then my father would say to her, "If you like them so much, why not go with them? What you give them is useless because they are stupid and don't work." Actually, both my parents were right. My mother's idea of charity was to give a little but every day, and she liked to give big donations to monasteries as well. She was an incredible lady. No one in the village ever criticized her or disagreed with her. She had no enemies, and many people visited our home. She was very pretty too, and had some wonderful jewelry. She gave her daughters when they married. Lots of gold and big corals. It was a Tibetan custom for mothers to take care of their daughters by passing on their jewelry and other valuables in this way. By the time I was 5, I wanted to go and live in a monastery because even though my family was harmonious, I actually thought family life was really garbage. I saw it as a kind of hell. In a way, they were happy, but they worked so very hard, almost 24 hours a day. They prospered, but I was dissatisfied. I felt it wasn't right for everyone just to work, eat, sleep, make caca, and then work some more. I had an intuitive feeling that human life could be more meaningful. No one was telling me these things, but deep inside I felt this kind of life was not right for me. As I was the first son, they wanted me to carry on the family business, but I continually tried to persuade them to change their minds. One day, my father went to a special lake. At first it was all foggy, but then the fog cleared and my father saw a vision of 2 begging bowls coming across the lake. After that, he said I could go to the monastery. When I went, my father took me on horseback, and that was my very first trip to Lhasa. Now, the political situation in Tibet continued to be complex. Reting Rinpoche played a leading role in the search for the next Dalai Lama. Lama Dondrup, a small boy from the village of Tokster in Amdo, was identified among the candidates, his name having been submitted by the elderly 9th Panchen Lama. After many tests, the search party, led by Sarah J. Abbott, Kutsang Rinpoche, became fully convinced that he was indeed the Dalai Lama's incarnation. By the end of the summer of 1939, the search delegation, together with the prospective Dalai Lama and his family, were en route to Lhasa. Before they arrived in the capital on October 1939, the National Assembly publicly and officially confirmed Lama Dondrup to be the 14th Dalai Lama, and he was given the name Tenzin Gyatso. In February 1940, the child, not yet 5 years old, was enthroned pending the attainment of his majority as the 14th Dalai Lama, the supreme temporal and spiritual ruler of Tibet. Reting Rinpoche continued to rule Tibet as the regent, but had many enemies. Accounts would be written of this time in Tibetan history that differed drastically from one another, especially concerning the role and the character of Reting Rinpoche. This ends Chapter 1.